Commander Vexthel sat in the cold metal chair, his 6 purple eyes staring at the young historian across from him. The scars on his chitinous face told stories of battles fought decades ago. His ceremonial armor, polished but dented, caught the dim light of the interview room. You really want to know about humans? Vexthel's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Fine, but don't blame me when you can't sleep afterward. The historian leaned forward, recording device humming softly. Tell me about your first encounter. Vexthel's mandibles clicked together slowly. Arcturus IV, a nothing planet on the edge. Of nowhere, we thought it would be easy. The memory hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. 40 years ago, he had been young, arrogant, commanding 8,000 of the Empire's finest warriors. The intelligence report said 300 humans were mining rare crystals on the planet's surface. 300 against 8,000. The math was simple. I remember standing on the bridge of my flagship, looking down at their little outpost. Through the view screen, Vexthel continued. It looked like a toy fort built by children. Metal prefab buildings, a few defense turrets that belonged in a museum, and these tiny bipedal creatures scurrying around like insects. His first mistake was underestimating them. The battlecruiser's sensors had locked on to the human commander immediately. A male specimen, approximately 1.8 meters tall, weighing maybe 80 kilograms. By Catherian standards, he was smaller than their adolescents. His name was Dongmin, Vexthel said, his translator struggling with the human syllables. I opened a communication channel, expecting immediate surrender, standard protocol for inferior species. The human's face appeared on the main screen. Dark hair, brown eyes, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He was wearing a simple military uniform, nothing fancy. But when he looked directly into the camera, Vexthel felt something he had never experienced before. Respect from prey. I gave him the usual speech, Vexthel admitted. Surrender now, become servants of the Empire, and we'll let most of you live. Pretty generous, considering. Dongmin had listened patiently, arms crossed, head tilted slightly. When Vexthel finished speaking, the human did something unexpected. He smiled. You know what he said to me? Vexthel's voice dropped to a whisper. He said something in their native language that made my translator circuits spark and smoke. Later, one of my intelligence officers told me it meant come and take it. Then Dongmin did something that still haunted Vexthel's dreams. The human looked directly at him through the screen and slowly raised his middle finger. The universal human gesture of defiance. The transmission cut off. My bridge crew was silent. In 300 years of conquest, no species had ever shown us such ... disrespect. Vexthel ordered the bombardment to begin at dawn. Plasma cannons that could level mountains opened fire on the human positions. The energy beams should have turned sand to glass and metal to vapor. When the smoke cleared, Vexthel expected to see empty craters and scattered debris. Instead, human soldiers emerged from tunnels they had somehow dug overnight. They came out shooting with weapons that fired metal projectiles, bullets the humans called them. Primitive by Catherian standards, but effective when fired with desperate accuracy. That's when I saw her, Vexthel said, his voice growing quiet. Yoon, a human female, maybe 25 of their years old. Red hair, green eyes, covered in dust and blood. A plasma bolt had struck near her position, sending superheated shrapnel in all directions. One piece caught her left arm, severing it cleanly. At the elbow. By all logic, she should have gone into shock and died. Instead, Yoon picked up her severed arm like it was a dropped tool. She wedged it against a blast door that was trying to close, using her own limb to keep the defensive position open for her squad mates. Then she crawled back to her heavy weapon and continued firing with her remaining arm, using her shoulder to steady the barrel. My soldiers stopped shooting, Vexthel admitted. It just stared. One of my sergeants asked if humans felt pain, the same way we did. I didn't have an answer. The battle continued for 3 days. Each Catherian assault met fierce resistance from humans who should have been dead hours ago. They turned mining explosives into booby traps, welded broken machinery into armor plating, somehow maintained military discipline while bleeding from wounds that would have killed any Catherian warrior. A private named Gensio held a choke point. For 6 hours, with a broken leg and a punctured lung, taking down 47 attackers before finally collapsing. When Catherian medics reached him, he was still trying to reload his weapon. Another human, Kiwu, rigged an entire section of their base with mining charges. When Catherian assault troops breached the perimeter, detonated everything, taking himself and 200 enemies with him. His last transmission was heard across all channels, for Earth, for freedom. But the moment that broke something, inside Vextal came on the third night. His forces had the humans surrounded, outgunned, and slowly bleeding to death. Victory was inevitable. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought his audio sensors were malfunctioning, a low rhythmic sound coming from the human positions. Then his translator kicked in, and he realized what it was. The humans were singing, not screaming in fear or begging for mercy. They were singing together, their voices harmonizing even as plasma bolts exploded around them. The song was in there. Ancient language, something about being free and brave, about a land of liberty that would never bow to tyrants. My warriors started requesting transfers, Vextal said, his 6 eyes distant with memory. Experienced soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds suddenly couldn't bring themselves to kill these singing, bleeding humans. Some of them threw down their weapons and walked away. The singing continued through the night, growing quieter as voices were silenced by death but never stopping completely. Even when only a handful of humans remained alive, they kept singing. Their defiant songs. Vextal had realized something that night that would haunt him forever. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting the embodiment of an entire species' refusal to kneel. Vextal's claws scraped against the metal table. As the memories grew darker, Day 4 changed everything. That's when I learned humans don't follow the basic rules of warfare. The morning started like any other. Vextal's forces had the mining station completely surrounded. His aerial drones showed the remaining humans, huddled in their makeshift bunkers, medical supplies nearly gone, ammunition critically low. Victory was hours away. Then his communications officer picked up incoming ships on the scanner. 3 human transport vessels broke through our blockade, Vextal said, his mandibles clicking with remembered frustration. Small, fast ships that somehow slipped past our patrol cruisers. My first thought was reinforcements, maybe 1,000 fresh troops to prolong the inevitable. The ships landed under heavy fire, engines smoking, hull plating melted from plasma strikes. When the ramp doors opened, Vextal expected to see battalions of heavily armed soldiers charging out. Instead, 50 humans jogged down the ramps. 50 I actually laughed, Vextal admitted. My tactical computer updated the odds, 350 humans versus 8,000 Catherians. The probability of human victory dropped to 0.003%. Statistically impossible. The reinforcement leader was a sergeant named Hyan Wu. Average height for a human, maybe 1.75 meters, with graying hair and calm brown eyes. He wore standard combat armor, covered in scorch marks, and carried an old-fashioned projectile rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. Vextal watched through his scopes as Hyan Wu gathered the survivors. The humans were in terrible shape, wounded, exhausted, running on pure willpower. Any sane commander would have ordered immediate evacuation. You know what Hyan Wu did first? Vestel's voice carried a mixture of respect and disbelief. He counted their ammunition, bullet by bullet, charge by charge. Then he redistributed everything equally among his troops. They had maybe 6 hours of sustained combat left between all of them. The logical move was surrender. Trade lives for mercy, negotiate terms, save what could be saved. Every military manual in the galaxy recommended it. Instead, the humans became predators. That night, Vextal's perimeter alarms started screaming. Human infiltrators had somehow penetrated his outer defenses and planted explosives in 3 supply depots. The blasts lit up the darkness like miniature suns, destroying enough ammunition to supply a full regiment.
Nice.
Impossible, Vextal had told his security chief. Our sensors would detect anything larger than a rodent moving through that area. But humans, he was learning, didn't move like other species. They crawled on their bellies for hours, covered themselves in mud and debris, held their breath for minutes at a time. They became part of the landscape itself. The raids continued. For 3 nights. Every time Vextel's forces thought they had sealed a gap, humans found another way through. They moved like ghosts, struck like lightning, and vanished before retaliation could arrive. The worst part was the sniper, Tehi. Vextel said the name like a curse. A human female, 1.6 meters tall, couldn't have weighed more than 55 kilograms. She killed more of my officers than a full artillery battery. Her first target was Colonel Jekdar, Vextel's most experienced field commander. One moment he was studying tactical displays in his command bunker, the next his head exploded from a bullet fired from over 2 kilometers away. Impossible shot, Vextel muttered. My weapons. Experts said no human rifle could make that distance with those atmospheric conditions. They were wrong. He struck again 12 hours later. Major Valkan died while inspecting forward positions. Another perfect headshot from an impossible angle. Then Captain Mordix fell while coordinating air support. Each shot came from a different location, each more improbable than the last. Vextel's forces began suffering from what human psychologists called paranoia. Officers refused to leave their bunkers. Soldiers ducked at shadows. Mere possibility of Tehi's presence froze entire units in terror. We finally detected her heat signature on day 5, Vextel said. Thermal imaging showed she was running a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. By Catherian medical standards, she should have been dead, or at least delirious. Instead, she was. Making shots that Vextel, as best marksman, called supernatural, moving target at 1,800 meters in a crosswind. A ricochet shot that curved around cover to hit an officer in his supposedly safe position. Precision that defied physics. My medics later explained that human adrenaline can override normal biological limitations, Vextel continued. But this was beyond adrenaline. This was something else entirely. The breaking point came when Private Minho made his stand. He was young even by human standards, maybe 19 years old, with a baby face that made him look like a child playing soldier. When Catherian assault troops breached the eastern perimeter, Minho was the only defender in position to respond, armed with nothing but a plasma cutter and a satchel of mining charges. He held the gap alone for 18 hours. 18 hours, Vextel repeated. One human child against waves of my best warriors. He turned that breach into a killing field. Minho used the plasma cutter like a sword, slicing through Catherian armor at close range. When enemies got Catherian too close, he triggered mining charges with pinpoint timing, bringing down sections of tunnel roof to crush advancing troops. He fought with the fury of a cornered animal, but the tactical thinking of a master strategist. After 6 hours, I sent a full company to overwhelm him, Vextel said. 47 of my warriors went into that breach. None came out alive. By hour 12, Minho was visibly wounded, blood streaming from multiple lacerations. By hour 15, he was moving slower, favoring his left side where shrapnel had punctured his body armor. By hour 18, he should have been dead. Instead, he kept fighting until his body finally gave out from blood loss. When we reached his position, he was unconscious, but still gripping his weapon, Vextel said quietly. My medics examined him and said he'd lost enough blood to kill 2 Catherians. His heart should have stopped hours earlier. But somehow, Minho's heart kept beating until the very end, kept pumping what little blood remained through sheer force of will. On day 6, the impossible happened. The humans ran out of ammunition. Vextel prepared for the final assault, expecting white flags and surrender negotiations. His troops moved forward cautiously, weapons ready, but expecting little resistance instead. The humans charged. 350 humans, many wounded, most exhausted. Armed with nothing but mining tools and desperate courage, launched themselves at 8,000 professional soldiers. They came screaming battle cries in their ancient languages, wielding pickaxes and welding torches like medieval weapons. The psychological impact was devastating. Vexthiel's troops had never faced an enemy that chose certain death over surrender. Some froze in shock. Others fired wildly, panic overriding training. A few actually turned and ran. 3 of my battalion commanders suffered complete mental breakdowns, Vexel admitted. Experienced officers who had conquered dozens of worlds couldn't process what they were seeing. How do you fight an enemy that has already chosen to die? Human charge lasted only minutes, but the psychological damage lasted forever. Even in victory, Vexthel's forces felt defeated. They had won through overwhelming numbers. It's not superior courage or skill. And deep down, every Catherian warrior knew the truth. If the numbers had been even remotely equal, the humans would have won. Vexthel's 6 eyes dimmed as he reached the hardest part of his story. His massive claws traced patterns on the table, a nervous habit he'd developed since the war. You think you understand humans after seeing them fight, he said slowly. But then you meet their healers, and everything you thought you knew crumbles. To dust, her name was So-Young. At first glance, she looked like nothing special. A tiny human female, maybe 1.5 meters tall, weighing perhaps 60 kilograms soaking wet. She had short black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wore medical scrubs under lightweight body armor. Her hands were small and delicate, the kind you'd expect to see arranging flowers, not performing battlefield surgery. Vextel first noticed her on day 3 of the siege. While other humans were manning weapons or building fortifications, So-Young was doing something that defied all military logic. She was treating the wounded. Not just human wounded, all wounded. I thought it was a trick at first, Vextel admitted. Some kind of psychological warfare. No species in the galaxy treats enemy casualties during active combat. But So-Young wasn't following galactic norms. When a stray plasma bolt brought down one of Vexthel's reconnaissance drones, injuring the Catherian pilot inside, she was the first to respond. She crawled across 50 meters of open ground while bullets and energy beams filled the air. Around her, Vexel watched through his command scope as this fragile human female dragged his 200-kilogram warrior to safety. The Catherian was unconscious, bleeding from deep cuts where metal had sliced through his carapace. By all military doctrine, he was an enemy combatant who should be left to die. Instead, So-Young applied pressure bandages with practiced efficiency. She injected him with human-compatible painkillers and used a portable medical scanner to check for internal injuries. Only after stabilizing the Catherian soldier did she turn attention to her own wounds. Shrapnel cuts from the drone explosion that were bleeding freely down her arms.
Oh.
My tactical officer suggested we target her immediately, Vextel said. She was clearly a high-value asset. But something made me hesitate. So-Young had established a makeshift medical station in the mining facility's central hub. She'd hung white sheets marked with red crosses, ancient human symbols for medical neutrality. The area became a strange bubble of peace in the middle of a war zone. Wounded humans would crawl or be carried there for treatment. But so would injured Catherians who found themselves caught in the crossfire. So-Young treated them all with the same gentle efficiency, never asking which side they fought for. She saved more of my warriors than our own medics, Vextel said, his voice filled with confusion even decades later. During the 4th-day assault, when Sergeant Lockmar took plasma burns across his torso, his squad dragged him to the human medical station instead of our field hospital. They trusted her more than our own doctors. The sight of a human female carefully treating Catherian wounds created ripples of unease through Vexel's forces. Soldiers began questioning the nature of their enemy. How could they be monsters? If their healer showed such compassion, So-Young worked 18-hour shifts without rest. When medical supplies ran low, she improvised with mining equipment and industrial chemicals. She turned welding masks into surgical lights and used mining sensors as diagnostic tools. Her tiny medical station became more advanced than some planetary hospitals. My sniper teams had perfect shots, Vexel continued. Clear lines of sight, optimal range, confirmed target identification. But when they radioed for permission to fire, something strange happened. The requests came in throughout day 5 and 6, sniper teams reporting Saw Young in their crosshairs, asking for clearance to eliminate the target. Each time, Vextel found himself hesitating. His finger would hover over the authorization button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. My own soldiers started refusing the orders, he admitted. Hardened veterans who had killed thousands in previous campaigns suddenly couldn't pull the trigger on one small human female. When I demanded explanations, they had none. They just ... couldn't do it. The breaking point came on day 7. Catherian plasma grenade, thrown during a desperate assault, landed near the medical station. The explosion tore through the makeshift facility, sending metal fragments flying like deadly rain. So Young was caught in the blast. Vextel's combat footage showed her being thrown against a support beam, her spine twisting at an unnatural angle. Blood immediately began pooling beneath her as internal organs failed from the impact. Trauma, any rational being would have used their remaining time to ease their own pain. Soyoung's medical kit still contained morphine and other powerful painkillers. She could have drifted away peacefully instead. She crawled toward a wounded Catherian warrior. His name was Genkal, a young soldier whose legs had been crushed by falling debris from the same explosion. He was conscious but in agony, his compound fractures visible through torn armor plating. Without immediate treatment, he would either die from shock or spend the rest of his life paralyzed. Saw Young's hands shook violently from blood loss as she worked. She couldn't feel her lower body anymore. The spinal injury had severed those nerve connections. But she still had her arms, and she used them to save an enemy's life. I watched through my command scope as she set his bones. Vexil said, his voice barely a whisper. Her vital signs were failing. Brain activity was shutting down, but she kept working. She whispered constantly while treating Genkal, words in what sounded like her native language. Later translation revealed they were prayers not for herself but for the warrior she was trying to save. She asked her gods to give him strength, to help him walk again, to let him see his family one more time. The bone-setting procedure took an hour. Soyoung's hands grew steadier as she worked, as if the act of healing gave her strength. She splinted the fractures with pieces of her own medical equipment, used her remaining antibiotics to prevent infection, and even jury-rigged a pain management system from salvaged electronics. She died while tying the final bandage. Vexil's mandibles trembled with the memory. Her last words, according to my translator, were "Take care of him." She was asking us, her enemies, to care for the soldier she'd just saved. The medical station fell completely silent. Both human and Catherian forces stopped shooting as if by mutual agreement. The war paused while Saw Young's body was carefully recovered from the debris. Genkal survived. The bone-setting procedure was so expertly done that he made a full recovery and returned to active duty within months. He carried a small piece of metal from Soyoung's medical kit with him for the rest of his life, a reminder of the enemy who chose to save him instead of herself. That night, 17 of my soldiers walked away from their posts, Vexil said. Not to the enemy. They just walked into the wilderness and disappeared. My security teams found them 3 days later, sitting around a campfire, staring at the stars. When interrogated, the deserters had no explanation for their actions. They simply said they couldn't fight anymore. The image of Saw Young dying too. Save their comrade had broken something fundamental in their warrior conditioning. How do you kill someone who would die for you? One of them asked during debriefing. How do you call them enemy when they show you what mercy really means? Vextal had no answer then. He still had no answer now. Vextal stared at his claws, now trembling slightly as the darkest memories surfaced. Day 8. The day I learned that victory can feel like the cruelest defeat. By dawn, the situation was mathematically simple. 23 humans remained alive, huddled in the mining facility's central core. They had no ammunition, no heavy weapons, and most were wounded. Vextal commanded over 4,000 troops still in fighting condition, plus orbital support, assault mechs, and enough firepower to level a small city. The smart play was surrender. Any rational commander would have raised the white flag hours. Go Commander Dongman was no longer the confident soldier who had defied Vextel 8 days earlier. His right eye was gone, lost to shrapnel on day 6. A deep gash ran from his forehead to his jaw, barely healed and still weeping blood. He walked with a severe limp from a plasma burn that had melted through his leg armor and seared the muscle beneath. But when he opened a communication channel to Vexel's flagship, his voice was steady. "Commander Vexel," Dongmen said, standing straighter despite his injuries, "I want to thank you." The words hit Vexel like a physical blow. "Thank me?" "Yes," Dongmen nodded slowly. "You've shown my people what we're truly capable of. What humans can become when everything is stripped away except our will to remain free." Vexel expected pleas for mercy, offers to negotiate, desperate attempts to buy time. Instead, Dongmen did something that would haunt the Catherian commander. For the rest of his life, he began reading names. Private Lee Chanwoo, age 19, from Seoul. He wanted his mother to know he was thinking of her kimchi recipe when he died. Sergeant Park Mason, 24, from Busan. She asked me to tell her daughter that mommy was brave. Corporal Kim Sung-ho, 22, from Daegu. His last words were about the girl he planned to marry when he got home. The list continued for 30 minutes. Every human who had died defending the mining station, every name spoken with respect and love, every personal message delivered with the care of a man who understood he was speaking for the dead. "We're not asking for mercy," Dongmen concluded. "We're not begging for our lives. We just wanted you to know that every person you killed had a name, had a family, had dreams. They weren't just soldiers. They were human beings who chose to die rather than kneel." The transmission ended. Vexel's bridge crew sat in uncomfortable silence. In 3 centuries of conquest, no enemy commander had ever thanked them for the privilege of being destroyed. The final assault began at first light. Vexel threw everything at the human position, orbital bombardment. Heavy assault mechs, his elite shock troops, and enough energy weapons to crack the planet's crust. He wanted it over quickly, cleanly, with minimal casualties to his own forces. The humans had other plans. They met the assault in the mining facility's central chamber. A vast cavern carved from solid rock with mining equipment scattered throughout. 23 humans against overwhelming odds. Armed with whatever they could scavenge from 8 days of fighting, Corporal Jae-sung wielded a broken plasma torch like a medieval sword. When Catherian warriors got close, he would grab them and trigger the torch, welding their armor joints together. The superheated metal would conduct through their carapaces, cooking them alive inside their own protection. He took down 6 warriors this way before a plasma bolt finally dropped him. Private Haijin had both arms broken from a cave-in on day 7. She couldn't hold weapons anymore. Instead, she used her teeth to pull pins from explosive charges, timing the detonations to bring down sections of ceiling onto advancing troops. Even dying, she managed to bury 12 Catherian soldiers under tons of rock. The most haunting sight was their voices. As they fought their final battle, the humans sang together. Ancient songs from their homeworld, melodies that spoke of sacrifice and honor and love that transcends death. Their voices echoed through the metallic corridors, creating an eerie harmony that made Vexel's warriors fight with tears in their eyes. Young In-soo, barely 18 years old, stood his ground with nothing but a mining pick and unshakable courage. He held a narrow choke point for 20 minutes, his pick rising and falling with mechanical precision. When energy bolts finally cut him down, he was still swinging, still singing, still refusing to yield. Sergeant Yuna, the demolitions expert, had rigged the entire chamber with improvised explosives. As Catherian forces closed in, she triggered them one by one, turning the battle into a deadly game of chess where every move cost lives on both sides. Her final explosion took out an entire Catherian assault squad and brought down the main support beam. "When the last human fell, my warriors should have been cheering," Vexel said, his voice hollow with memory. Victory celebrations, promotion ceremonies, the usual aftermath of successful conquest. Instead, his troops stood in stunned silence. Among the bodies, the mathematics of the battle made no sense. 3,000 Catherian casualties to kill 300 humans? Elite warriors brought low by miners and maintenance, Workers armed with improvised weapons and desperate courage. But the humans had one final lesson to teach. As Vexil's engineers moved in to secure the facility, hidden charges began detonating throughout the complex. The humans had spent their final hours rigging the entire mining operation to collapse. Not randomly, but with surgical precision designed to maximize enemy casualties. They could have simply died fighting, Vexil observed, his mandibles clicking. With nervous energy, heroic last stands, glorious deaths, all very poetic. Instead, they chose to make their deaths tactically meaningful. The facility's collapse was perfectly orchestrated. Support beams failed in sequence, bringing down sections of the complex in a controlled avalanche of steel and stone. Escape routes were blocked. Structural weak points were exploited. Even in death, the humans were still fighting. 800 Catherian warriors died in the collapse, buried alongside every human defender. The rescue operations took days, and with each body they pulled from the rubble, Vexil's understanding of his enemy deepened. In the debris, soldiers found personal effects that told the real story of who they had been fighting. Photographs of human families, parents, children, loved ones waiting back on Earth. Children's artwork, carefully preserved in waterproof containers. Handwritten letters that would never be sent, filled with love and hope and promises to return home. 1. Letter found clutched in Dongman's dead hand was addressed to his 6-year-old daughter. It read, "My little star, Daddy had to go far away to keep bad people from hurting you. I want you to know that everything I did because I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Be brave, be kind, and remember that freedom is worth any price." That's when I understood, Vexil said, his 6 eyes dim with exhaustion. We hadn't been fighting soldiers following orders. We had been fighting parents protecting their children, lovers defending their beloved, and citizens who would rather die than see their people enslaved. The victory celebration never happened. Instead, Vexil's forces held an unprecedented ceremony, a moment of silence for their fallen enemies. Even in conquest, they couldn't bring themselves to dishonor the humans who had fought with such extraordinary courage. The mining facility became a tomb for both species, a monument to the price of freedom and the cost of trying to steal it. From those who value it more than life itself. Vexil's massive frame settled back into the metal chair, his 6 eyes growing distant as decades of memory weighed down on him. The scars across his chitinous face seemed deeper in the dim light, each one a reminder of battles that changed everything he thought he knew about war. 40 years, he whispered, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had lived too long with ghosts. 40 years, and I still wake up hearing their voices. Still see So Young's hands trying to save my warrior. Still hear Minho's battle cry echoing through that breach. The young historian across from him shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the triumphant war story he had expected to record. This was something else entirely, a confession maybe, or a warning. After Arcturus IV, I couldn't fight anymore, Vexil continued. Not like before. I requested transfer to intelligence analysis. My superiors thought I was suffering from combat fatigue. They were wrong. I was suffering from understanding. The transfer had saved his sanity, but destroyed his worldview. For 3 decades, Vexil buried himself in data, trying to comprehend what he had witnessed. He studied human psychology, analyzed their military tactics, traced their cultural evolution across centuries. Every piece of information only deepened the mystery. Other species are predictable, he explained. The Zephyrians fight for territory. The Mordekians fight for resources. The Valkyrie fight for dominance. Simple motivations that any military mind can understand and counter, but humans were different. They fought for abstract concepts that had no physical form. Freedom, honor, the right to choose their own destiny. Ideas that couldn't be conquered or destroyed because they lived in the human heart rather than any physical location. I analyzed battle reports from across the galaxy, Vexil said. Every time our forces encountered humans, the pattern repeated. Impossible odds. Desperate last stands. Pyrrhic victories that cost us more than defeats. The Battle of New Geneva had cost the Catherian Empire 2 full battle fleets to capture, A single agricultural world. The humans had turned farming equipment into weapons, used grain silos as fortresses, and fought with such ferocity that veteran warriors refused follow-up assignments against human targets. On Kepler 4-4b, a mining colony of 8,000 humans held off an invasion force of 50,000 Catharians for 6 months. When the colony finally fell, the survivors had rigged their entire underground city to collapse, taking 12,000 enemy troops with them into the depths. The pattern was always the same. Humans didn't fight to win in any conventional sense. They fought to make conquest so expensive that victory became meaningless. My reports began influencing high command strategy, Vextel admitted. Not because they trusted my judgment, but because the mathematics were undeniable. Every human world we conquered cost us more than it was worth. The war machine that had rolled across hundreds of star systems began to slow and stumble when it encountered human resistance. Veteran units requested transfers. New recruits developed psychological disorders after their first encounters with human defenders. The Empire's military efficiency dropped by 30% across all theaters of operation. The breaking point came at the siege of New Tokyo, Vextel said, his mandibles clicking with remembered pain. 50,000 humans versus 300,000 Catharians should have been over in days. Instead, it lasted 2 years. The humans turned the entire city into a fortress, fighting block by block, building by building, room by room. They used subway tunnels as ambush routes, turned skyscrapers into sniper nests, and somehow maintained civilian morale even as their city burned around them. The final casualty reports were classified at the highest levels. 280,000 Catharian, dead to kill 50,000 humans. The math was insane. The Empire had achieved tactical victory by essentially committing military suicide. After New Tokyo, volunteer rates for human combat zones dropped to 0, Vexel said. We had to start using conscripts in penal battalions. Our own soldiers were more afraid of fighting humans than they were of court-martial. That's when the political pressure began, Catharian families demanding to know why their sons and daughters were dying to conquer species that seemed determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. Economic ministers questioning the cost of occupying territories that required permanent garrison forces to prevent constant rebellion. The Emperor summoned me personally, Vextel remembered, wanted to understand why our invincible military machine was breaking itself against human resistance. The meeting had lasted 6 hours. Vexel presented his analysis with clinical precision. Humans represented a unique evolutionary development. They had somehow programmed themselves to value abstract ideals more than individual survival. This made them militarily unpredictable and economically impossible to conquer sustainably. I recommended immediate cessation of hostilities, Vexel said. Not because humans were stronger than us, but because they were willing to pay prices we couldn't afford to collect. The Emperor had been skeptical until Vextel showed him the projected casualty figures for a full conquest of human space. The numbers were staggering. The Empire would need to sacrifice its entire military to enslave a species that would never stop fighting for freedom. That's when I became a peace advocate, Vextel continued. Not from any love of humans, but from simple mathematical reality. You cannot conquer people who would rather die than be conquered. Now, decades later, Vextel spent his time educating young Catharian officers about the true nature of warfare. Not the glorious conquest depicted in propaganda, but the ugly. The reality of fighting people who believe some things were worth dying for. The younglings come to me seeking stories of honor and glory, he said, rising slowly from his chair. I tell them about Saw Young, who died saving her enemies. About Minho, who held impossible odds because surrender wasn't in his vocabulary. About Dongmin, who thanked us for showing his people what courage really meant. The aged commander moved toward the chamber exit, his massive form casting long shadows in the corridor lighting. Each step seemed to carry the weight of all the humans who had died refusing to kneel. We thought we were conquering another species, Vexel said, pausing at the doorway. We discovered we were fighting freedom itself. And freedom, once awakened, cannot be killed by any weapon in the galaxy. His testimony would be distributed throughout the Catharian Military Academy. Required reading for any officer who might encounter human forces. The message was simple. Some enemies cannot be defeated, because they have already chosen victory through sacrifice. The interview ended with his formal recommendation for immediate peace negotiations. His words would echo through the halls of power, slowly building momentum for an end to a war that had already cost too much to continue. Arcturus IV became a memorial site visited by warriors from both species. The small plaque erected there carried a simple message in both languages. Here lie those who knew that freedom is not free and paid its price willingly. The war officially ended 3 years later. Not through human victory or Catherian defeat, but through mutual recognition that some conflicts have no winners, only survivors, who are forever changed by what they have witnessed. The end.